Hello everyone, welcome to JS Gigs and my name is Deepak. Here in this tutorial, we are going to be talking about some of the important aspect of Cypress framework, right? So what is that? So if you're looking at my code editor at this moment, we have so far written end-to-end test cases. We have also written a component test case. We have also spoken about the structure and the configuration file of Cypress, right? Thing that we have not spoken about so far is all these files resides inside all these files and folder which resides inside the Cypress folder. So E2E, we are already aware that E2E basically going to be holding all the end-to-end test cases. You set this up essentially, right? So when you write end-to-end test case and then you give the path in your configuration, that's when it tries to pick this up here. That's the by default Cypress configuration, right? So if you look closely over here, there is a screenshot, and that's something which we have already spoken about. If you, let's say, wish to take a screenshot, this is the place where it gets saved at, right? And the thing that, or the folder that we have not spoken about so far is fixtures and downloads. So let's just talk about fixtures first, right? So what is fixtures? So fixtures essentially means that, let's say if you wish to hold or make use of some JSON data in your test case later on. So fixtures is a place where you would have to paste that data in the proper JSON format, and that's when you can use that in your scripts. And how we can do it, that's something we are going to be seeing now. Let me take you to the browser, and here the browser, the application that we have built so far is this. I think that's something that we have already spoken about a few times in the past. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be talking about fixtures first. So in order to do this, I'll again take you back to the code editor. And here at the code editor, I'm going to be writing a first fixture of mine. So what is that? I'm just going to be basically writing, let's say, a file inside it, and the file name may be, let's say, username. This username.json going to be holding some data, which is essentially the name, email, and the body, let's say. So this is the data that I wanted to hold. So once you have this data available, you can basically make use of this data in your script, right? So how we can do that? So let's just say that the first script of ours, which is defined inside the E2E and then E2E login.cy. And if you notice here, I have basically hard coded the username and password, right? So I could basically read that from the JSON files given over here inside the fixtures folder. And how can I do that? It's fairly simple and straightforward, and that's what I'm going to be doing now, right? So let's just say this. By the way, the architecture of Cypress is such that this fixture file would be available at the runtime or when you run your scripts with a variable called fixtures, right? So let's say cy dot fixture, and the name is username.json. After you put then, it is going to be putting all its data inside this, and let's just do it this way. And then what I'm going to do is like I'll just copy paste this inside this folder over here, indent it properly, and then I will do the data, and this is going to be data dot username, and this is going to be data dot password. And I think we do not have a password over here, so let me create and also put comma in the end, and also the username property we must have. So username, I'm going to be saving this and coming here again. I think data dot username and data dot password, and I think this should be good. So now let me run this. The command for running the test case is npx cypress open, And I'm going to be sharing the entire desktop of mine because that's where you would be able to see the windows which are getting opened. So let me click on the E2E. I'm going to be selecting the Chrome. Let's come here. Let's click on the E2E and there you go. Now you can see that we were able to read the username and password from Fixture, right? So now I hope that I'm clear enough for you to understand what fixtures are. Let's say if I were to write a failure scenario and I want some hard-coded data for my failure scenario, so how would I write it? Let's just try writing that as well. So this is one test case, and let's say the other test case I'm going to be writing in this particular test case, although we have tested the login page separately, but I want to show you the power of fixture, that how you can basically make multiple use cases. Username.json. So here it's just going to be the whole copy of it, except the fact I'm not going to be putting the @ mark. And let's see if that works. So when I use error hyphen username.json, in this particular case, my test case must fail, right? And let's just try to do that. Right, so now let me share the whole desktop of mine and see if that fails. And there you go. Now you can see that the username and password I've written is not a valid username and the password is actually the same, since the username is not proper as per the expectation, and that's why this has failed. So how do I make it, how do I correct, or how do I write the negative test case? So what I'm going to do is, like, I already have the login page available with me. So what I'm going to do is, like, I'm just going to be copying that particular use case or that particular test from my login.cy to here in my E2E case. However, it is not necessary. You only need to test it once, and then you can do a segregation of duties and then basically decide what you really need to do, right? So when you do that, the username and password both basically um, the MDC button would be disabled, right? So let's say I'll copy this particular test case. In this case, what we had essentially written while we were writing the component based test case was that we will try to get the username, and then when we try to search, that's when we used to display the error message, which is email is required, right? So let me copy this. So I'll remove both of them and write this. And let me share the whole desktop of mine once again. And there you go. Now you can see that the test case has essentially passed. So we can see the error message over here, right? So I believe that I believe now you are able to understand what fixtures are, right? And there is another test case, or there is another advanced test case that we are going to be writing now, right? So which is basically retry, right? So how do we do that? So let's say in our particular test case, what we have written is that the moment we do the username and password, we click on the button, and then it moves to the next screen where the dashboard /dashboard is found in the URL. Assume a scenario where the movement doesn't happen quickly. Let's say there is an API call in the background, and that API call is not fulfilled, as a result of which this movement did not happen. So how would you mimic, or how do you test that? So in order to write this particular scenario, I'll again take you back to the code editor, and here at the code editor, let me close everything else and open the E2E test case. And in this case, let's say it takes a moment, right? So let me try to mimic this particular scenario. So now you can see that it essentially takes an auth service and it tries to log in. And once it logins and this promise is fulfilled, or rather this subject is subscribed, that's when it comes here and then do a navigation. But assuming a scenario where the login takes about 2 seconds, and that's something which we had done in the past, right? So let's say delay, and then delay is of 10 seconds. And we share the whole desktop of mine, and there you go. So let's refresh this once again. So what really happens is that I have key in the username and password, but then the username and password, even after I write down the username and password, it takes a moment to subscribe or to get the subscription correctly subscribed inside my login component, as a result of which it failed, because essentially we the everything is fine, but just that you're not really able to get the result on time, and that's why it failed. So how we can solve such scenarios where you are writing a right test case, however it's getting timed out because the API response, or for any other matter you have any synchronous task happening in your browser which is stopping your navigation, which is stopping your next condition to be true C, right? So how do I do that? So there is this concept inside Cypress called retries, right? So let me just open the documentation and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here's the documentation which talks about the test retries. And if you read about this particular test retries documentation, you would know that, there are ways in which you can basically, let's say if your test case fail and it's supposed to be passed, in that case, you can do a retry. And retry is something which is a configurable property. So let's say if you have any property in your web browser, and let's say if you wish to set this up, and that's what we are going to be, let's say if you wish to set up the retry property for your test cases, that's something which can be done from the code editor, and that's exactly what we are going to be doing now, right? So how does it really work? It tells your browser, it tells your Cypress engine, let's say if a particular assertion fails, it's going to retry that particular assertion for a few more times, or until the retry number matches, or the number of times you have given a retry either for your end-to-end or for your component test case. It's going to be running those many times, and once it succeeds after those attempts, it's going to be declaring it as pass, and it is not really going to be declaring it as fail in, let's say, 1, 2 or 2 or 3 attempt in the case in which especially in the case that you can see on your browser right now, it has given a 3 retry and still it failed, as a result of which it tells all of those 3 have failed. But essentially you can configure it. Let's say we are going to be doing that 2 times, or let's say 3 times, and let's see that what really happens. So let me take you to the code editor, and here at the code editor, I'm going to be opening a configuration file for Cypress, which is here. And then here there is a property, retries, and let's say I give it a number as 4, right? And let's see what really happens if I give it a 4 number, and let me share the entire desktop of mine once again. And now I'm going to be running this, and let's see what happens. So now you can see that all these 4 attempts have failed because it was not really able to move to the dashboard page. Why? Because every time it clicked on it, it really did not move the location from login to dashboard, right? So let's just try to fix this. So let me again take you to the code editor, and here at the code editor in our E2E test case over here. Okay, so if you look closely in your login component, it takes about 10 seconds before it actually moves or comes here, or realize it inside, or before the subject is subscribed. So why does it take 10 seconds? Because we have written a code like that, right? And then if you see over here, we have given a 10 seconds. And also, if you look at the configuration file here, or rather, let me just share my entire desktop. And here the desktop, let's just see what it says. So if you look closely over here, it says that timeout trying 4000 milliseconds expected to include dashboard. What it essentially means is that it is getting timed out at 4000 milliseconds. As a result, it is not really waiting for 10 seconds to for the subject, for this application, for the API to be subscribed. It is actually getting timed out at 4000 milliseconds itself. So how we can fix it? So in order to fix it, we need to really increase, or rather in this particular case, we need to increase the timeout timing, right? So how do we increase the timeout timing? So in order to do so, let's just take you to the documentation, and let's just say this one, right? So here you can see that the timeout, right, while you are running the test case, you can actually do such type of timeout. And how can you write a timeout? Either you can do it while running the test case, or you can actually provide the timeout here in their in the script, or in their command itself. And let's just say in our case, we are going to be giving a global timeout. The reason why we want to give global timeout is because I just want to show you how it really works, and you can basically drill down the timeouts in further configurations. But in our case, we want to give it globally, and then we'll also try to do that locally for one particular use case. In this case, the login page alone, right? So let me take you back to the code editor, and here at the code editor, I'm going to be writing. So let me write it down this way, right? So if you, the moment you start writing timeout, it gives you some suggestions. So first is execution timeout, in which it says that time in millisecond to wait for system command to finish executing during cy.exec. Please understand that the timeout is different for all of these statement and command that we use. We are also going to be using a dot task method, and that's something which also has a timeout given here separately. And similarly is for the request timeout. Let's say if you wish to do a request in cy.wait XHR request, then the default timeout for that is 5 seconds. And if you wish to wait for that particular request to fulfill, you can actually come here and do a specific timeout. Please understand that all these timeouts are given in two different objects, right? So if you look closely over here, the first object is the E2E, the second object is the component. So you can define these timeouts separately for them, or you can define them together as well. So let's say if I were to design it or define it for both of them, so how would I do that? So I could do the default command timeout. So by default it is 4,000 milliseconds, and that's precisely is the reason why our test cases was failing. Now I'm going to be increasing it to, let's say, 11 or 12,000 milliseconds, which is 12 seconds. And precisely our API fulfills the response after 10 seconds, so 3 seconds more. And I believe that once I give a 12,000 milliseconds of wait time, I am assuming that in this timeout period, my API response would arrive, and then the app would be able to log into and land on the dashboard page. So in order to do so, let me take you there. Let me share the entire desktop of mine, and there you go. So let me run this once again. So you may notice that it is basically executing all of these. So API call has been made, and now it is really fulfilling, trying to wait for the response, and post 10 seconds it receives a response and moves to the dashboard. And if you look closely over here, the assertion is successful. Why? Because it landed on dashboard, and how it successfully landed on dashboard is also precisely through this, right? So let's say if you were to you have a particular scenario where you wanted to wait for a particular DOM element to appear, and let's say it appears after a, let's say if it appears after a certain time. So in that case, you could define a retry. So I hope you would be able to understand. I hope that I've made it clear that default timeout and executive timeout, and there are various other timeouts available within the Cypress Cypress umbrella, which is response timeout, page load timeout, request timeout, task timeout, and etc. All these timeouts have different meanings, and all these timeouts have different tasks. Whereas the one where we have written is the default command timeout. In that case, it basically applies to all of those, meaning it applies to the task, it applies to the wait, it applies to the request, and all of that other 4 timeout that we had seen. It's a documentation. So this is all about the default command timeout, and we have also spoken about the retries, as we had also seen. Let's say if a particular session fails, it tries it for the 4 times, and probably we can give a value of 3. And I believe that we should give this as a common, because I want to keep this as a common practice for both of these, which is end-to-end and the component test case. And also let me put this down here, so that all these default one I define at the top, and then particularly I define, let's say if I wish to do anything just for the end-to-end component, in that case I would define them separately inside these objects. So I believe that I'm clear enough for you guys to understand. I'm clear enough to all of you. In case if you have a particular doubt, please do write down in the comment section below, and I'll try to create and cover them separately, create a different video tutorial around it, and also try to cover that separately. I think that's pretty much it about the timeout and test retries. Now there is another thing that I want to bring your attention to. So if you come over here, and then let me just take you back to the important documentation, which is the environmental variable. Please understand that I hope those who are working as a developer would be able to understand, or as a developer you would be able to. I hope all of you would be able to understand the priorities of your environments. Let's say if you are running a particular, if you're releasing a particular application, usually it happens that developers usually they release that in dev, and post dev they release it in UAT, and after UAT they go live, right? So essentially there are 2 or 3 environments, and all of those environments are hosted separately. They have different variables, they have different URLs altogether. Before I make that point, I want to close down every other thing here, and then let me close this file, and this file, and also just let me share the code editor alone. So here the code editor. Here in the code editor, if you look here, what I've recently defined is that localhost 4200 login, right? So I hope that you are able to understand that it is essentially, since I'm making it work only at the local, and that's why it is picking this up and it is making it work. Assume I were to run this in the CI pipeline, and let's say if I were to run it for dev, a UAT, or a prod environment, how would I do that? It essentially would fail because localhost 4200 would not be found there in the end-to-end test case in case of prod, UAT, or dev. In those cases, I may have to define the exact URL and path, right? And also I would have to basically arrange them in such a manner that I can change them anytime I like, but my script would not really fail, and I will be able to use the same script in all the environments that are there in my purview, right? So how do we do that? So there is this thing called environmental variable. Now let me take you back to browser. So here you have a list of environment variable. There are 4 or 5 different ways through which you can set up the environment variables. Why they are different is basically you can choose anything you like, right? You can basically do through configuration file. You can do that in the Cypress environment.json. You can also do that in the Cypress by exporting these variables. You can also do that in the environment variable itself, like by running the Cypress test, or such that Cypress run, and then you, with the hyphen env option, you provide all of these environmental variables. So env stands for environmental variable. And also you can actually do a test configuration, and when you do a test configuration, you can basically define the env like this, right? So let's say if you have a dev API and anything like that, you can basically come over here and within the describe block, within the describe function, it has basically 3 arguments. The first is the name, the second is the environment variable, the third is the callback function. So second parameter is optional, and that's why we have not really defined it all that while, but then you can very well do so, right? So how we do it? It's fairly simple. You can just come here and can define it that the way it is written in the line, as you can see in the option 5, right? We will cover all of these, but then let me start by giving you an example first, is using the configuration file. So let me share the entire desktop, or let me take you back to the code editor. So if you notice there in the documentation, it has mentioned that cypress.config.ts. That's where you define the environment variable, right? So in the cypress.config.ts, you will notice that there is this import that we have here. So it says define config, and you can actually define the environment variable here in the configuration file. So how can you do that? It's fairly simple. You would just need to come here and then type env, and please understand that this was also an optional case, right? And then all right, so we have defined the base URL inside the environment variable. So there are multiple other environment variables that you can basically write over here. Okay, so you can define, let's say, prod URL. In such case, you can probably write uh, you know prod.com, and let's say UAT URL. In that case, you can write UAT URL. You can actually write down username, right? So you can define any environment variable over here. And how would you access these? It's fairly simple. You just need to go over here, and in this case, instead of this time, we have written the username from data.username. What we're going to do is, like, we're going to be reading the environment variable, and we read it using cy.env. We read it using cy.env, or rather cypress.env. So let me write cypress cypress.env, and then there's going to be a function, and I'm going to be using the username essentially to read it, right? So now what will happen is that this particular username would come and would be played over here from the environment variable, right? Similarly, you can write any of the URL. Let's say if you were to visit any documentation, so what you can do is like say for example here, right? And let's just look at the cypress config.json. I think we have defined the base URL in the environment, and I think this is not how it is supposed to be. So if you're defining a base URL, please understand that you will have to define that in respective objects. Say for example, if you're running an E2E test case, in which case you will have to define the base URL here. What we're going to do is like we're going to be running this particular test case. So in order to run this, we will have to start the test case command here once again, and let me close this, clear the console, and press an up arrow to start it. It takes a moment, it opens up, and then I'm going to be sharing the entire desktop of mine. And once this boots up, it'll tell you the option to open. So let's say E2E test. Let's start this. Wait for a moment for it to appear, and let it open up. And there you go. All right, so if you scroll down here, you click on E2E, there you go. So now you can see that all of these environment variables the application is able to read, and my application is also able to execute all these test cases given over here. It is able to read it, apply that in the input boxes over here, and can also run the sessions, right? So now I'll share the browser and I'll show you the other four other ways to. So here is the environment variable. You can see that there are multiple ways through which you can actually read the environment variable. The first of which we have already seen is when you define the environment variable using configuration file. There's another way in which you write cypress.env.json, and then you can create this file, and then you can create the environment variable. All these options are available. Like if you want to know more about these, please do write down in the comment section below. But then if you have a specific case, I would request you to come here and read about this, and then choose a best case scenario for you. If you have a doubt in any of these options, please do write down in the comment section below, and I'll try to create and cover them in the next tutorial, or I'll try to create a separate video tutorial around it. But for now, I think it's all about the environment variable. So I think by that we finish this tutorial. So I'll just quickly recap on what we have studied so far. So we spoke about test retries in the beginning, and then we also spoke about fixtures. We try creating .data, .json files, and when we create .json file, we're able to read them inside our script by using cy.fixture and the name of the JSON file. In both the cases, like the error in the normal case, we were also able to see the retry configuration that we usually define in the cypress.config.ts. We were also able to see the environment variable, one of which we have given here. There are four other ways through which you can define and can read the environment variable and run your test cases accordingly. What is the need of these environment variables is also something that we have already spoken about, meaning when you have multiple environments, you want your test case to run considering those environments. So these dynamic values, you don't really need to hard code, but provide them through environment variable, and that's what essentially we have done over here, right? So what else? So thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the tutorial. I think by this I would want to finish this part of the tutorial. In the next one, we will see how to read the data from the Excel sheet and write the test cases. So, and also see how to create the videos in the test cases and record them and then use them later on, and then also we will try to finish up the remaining use cases wherein we land on, once we land on the dashboard, and then we'll try to see these input, and we'll try to test the form over here, the inputs, the drop downs. So for now, I think that's pretty much it. I'll see you in the next tutorial. But until then, if you are liking my work, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also hit the bell icon in case if I post a new video, you would be notified. So thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for watching my tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.